Chapter 7. Bree jumped behind the sofa as the guard swung around to keep an eye on the dining room door. Crawling on her hands and knees, she snuck a look around the side of the piece of furniture. "Bree, he has a gun!" Everett yelled toward the door. "Shut up!" the man hissed at Everett. It was all the distraction she needed. While the guard's attention was on Everett, she pushed herself to her feet and flung herself at him. All 130 pounds hit him from the side, and he stumbled. Grabbing the wrist of the hand that held the gun, she brought her hands down hard while bringing her knee up to his elbow. The man let out a cry of pain, dropping the gun. Everett suddenly had an arm around the man's neck. "What do we do with him?" Everett asked as he struggled to keep hold of the wriggling guard. Bree pointed the gun at the guy. "Sit in the chair, close your eyes, and start counting." Everett quickly stepped back out of the weapon's way. "I would listen to her." The guard grimaced, but chose to sit in the chair. "Start counting, loudly." Bree motioned Everett to back away with her toward the dining room door. 1, 2, 3, the guard gruffly called out, annoyed and irritated by his situation. "Count louder." Bree stashed the gun in a nearby plant and opened the patio door as quietly as she could as the guard's volume increased. Everett grabbed her shoulders, hustling her out of the living room. "Guard coming from the dining room," he whispered in her ear as they rounded the house, trying to stay out of sight of the windows. "We need to go." Bree pointed to the trees. "Did you find David?" Everett asked. "No." Bree chose to elaborate later. "Run!" She sprinted across the lawn and could hear Everett running after her. Then the dogs started barking, and Bree sped up as fast as she could, knowing the canines could outrun them. Everett had longer legs and was catching up. Bree burst through the trees, hoping the dogs still had their collars on and would not go off the property into the woods. She continued to weave her way through the brush, remembering which way to go to the beach. They would need to find a place to hide until the boat came for them. It was dark, and more than once Bree stumbled, branches leaving scratches on her arms and face. Finally, she stopped, gasping for breath. It was deathly quiet around her. Too quiet. Where was Everett? "Everett?" she whispered loudly into the stillness. "Everett?" There was no reply. Swallowing down panic that the security goons had managed to nab him again, Bree turned around to retrace her steps. She took out a small penlight, covered with red cellophane to dim the light a little. Slowly making her way back toward the house, Bree came back to the edge of the property. The dogs must have been penned up again, because she didn't see them. They were barking in their enclosure. The house had a few lights on, and she could see a security man sweep the yard with his flashlight. Backing into the trees, Bree tried to estimate where she and Everett might have entered the brush. Making her way around, she found the telltale signs of their entry. Numerous broken branches and flattened grass told the story. She followed along, noting that one of them had broken the tripwire. Bree frowned. If the cameras were going all the time, then what was the tripwire for? Moving forward, she followed the path that they had made. Bree was surprised that no one had followed them into the woods. Maybe the goons were just hired for the house and to keep the ghostwriter safe. Or perhaps they had been followed and they now had Everett. She tried to tamp down the fear that thought brought. She needed Everett to be okay. He was a good guy. Plus, he was there to pay the bills, she reminded herself firmly. It had nothing to do with how he made her feel when he wrapped his arms around her. Keeping to the trail they made, not even 100 feet from the perimeter of the house, Bree found Everett face down in the mud and grass. Everett! Kneeling beside him, she checked him for injuries when a snore erupted from his frame. Bree rocked back on her heels, scowling in confusion at the form of the man before her. He was sleeping? Shutting her gaping mouth, Bree gave him a firm shake. Nothing happened except another snore was emitted. Bree pushed on his shoulder with both hands, turning him over so that she could see his muddy face. He was obviously asleep. Bree uncapped a water bottle from her pack and poured part of the contents over his face. Everett jerked, his bleary eyes opening. "What is wrong with you?" "Why are you asleep?" she countered. Grabbing his arm, she tugged on him. "Get up! We need to get going." "What happened?" Everett mumbled as he frowned, lumbering to his feet. He sagged against Bree, nearly causing her to fall under his weight. "Where are we?" "The island?" Bree grunted, trying to move him forward toward the beach. "Walk, 1 foot in front of the other." "We were running," he nodded with some exaggeration. Everett yawned, blinking his eyes in the darkness. "Something hit my neck." "What?" Bree looked up at him. She shone the flashlight at his neck. She didn't see anything. "Got stung by a bee." Everett yawned again, his eyes closing as he leaned heavily on her. He set his head on hers. "Everett?" Bree said desperately as even more of his large frame draped over her. "Wake up!" He muttered something incoherently. Bree elbowed him in the solar plexus. He coughed, jerking his head up. "What?" "Walk," Bree commanded. He stumbled along with her. "You smell nice." Bree highly doubted that. They had been running around on a humid day. She really didn't think she smelled nice at all. "Coconut rum," he murmured, closing his eyes again, stumbling over a root. "Everett, pay attention," Bree huffed as she tried not to collapse under his weight. "We need to get to the beach. I'm not going to drag you there. You're too big for me to handle." A sigh graced the crown of her head as his feet staggered along with hers. "Too tired." Bree wondered if he had met up with a poisonous spider or something. This wasn't good. "You can do this, Everett. 1 foot in front of the other. We'll get you to the beach, camp out for a few hours, and take the boat back to civilization. If you need a doctor, we'll get you one." She wasn't going to let him die on her watch. Bree continued to labor under his weight as they pushed through the trees. It was a good thing no one was hunting them, Bree reflected ruefully. Anyone could hear Everett snoring a mile away if they were so inclined. No longer worried about his health, Bree had sat beside him for 3 hours in the sand and realized that all he was going to do was sleep. Thankfully, she had managed a cat nap of her own. Bree could sleep through anything. It was a blessing because her apartment was near one of the busiest freeways in the city. It was a curse because she often slept through her alarms. As a coping mechanism, Bree had 5 alarms set in various places around her apartment so that she would have to leave the comfort of her warm cocoon of a bed to shut them off. She had a habit of sleepwalking a little too, so 4 alarms were not enough. It was surprisingly cool, so Bree had wrapped them both in a blanket at the edge of the trees and used Everett as a pillow. He was a nice pillow. Bree told herself not to get used to the idea. After she caught David, she would never see him again. When her cell phone went off, Bree packed away the blanket and started to scan the waters. She didn't see anyone out there. Then again, she had been told the boat would be very discreet about noise and light. Bree stuck to the plan, taking out 2 inflatable life jackets. Putting one on herself, she shook Everett hard. "Wakey, wakey!" "Is it morning?" groaned Everett, wiping a hand along his face. "Time to get going." Bree pulled on his arm, making him sit up. "You need to put this on." "Why? Where are we?" He frowned as she coaxed him into the life jacket, fastening it up like he was a child. Everett yawned. "Oh, no, you don't." Bree tapped his face with the back of her hand to get his attention. "No sleeping. We are going for a swim." "Swim?" He looked at her in confusion. Then he rubbed his neck. "I was stung." "You told me that?" Bree rolled her eyes, pulling the cord to inflate her own vest. "Get up, Everett." He lurched to his feet with her help. Pulling something from his pocket, Everett held it out to her. "This stung me." Bree shone the flashlight into his hand. It was a tranquilizer dart. No wonder Everett was trying to sleep all the time. She carefully took it, making sure it didn't prick her. "Okay, I'm just going to leave this here. Stand up for a moment, and then we'll inflate your vest and turn on your light, okay?" Everett nodded numbly. He stretched and nearly toppled over. Bree caught him, steadying him. "Stay!" She left him weaving on his feet while she buried the dart in the tree line. Coming back, she was surprised that he was still upright. He blinked blearily at her. "Was David here?" "No." Bree pulled his cord and his vest inflated. She turned on both their rescue lights. They blinked in the darkness. "But we may have a new lead." "Oh?" Everett somewhat perked up with interest. Bree helped him on with his pack before putting her own on. "Into the water. Let's go." He dutifully followed her. "Aren't you worried about the sharks?" "Not really. You?" Bree grabbed his hand to make sure he didn't wander in the wrong direction. He threaded his fingers through hers. "Nope. The likelihood of getting bit by a shark is less than getting hit by lightning, or drowning, being in a car accident, or dying from a fireworks accident," he told her sleepily. "I like holding your hand." Bree tried to stop the flutter that danced across her abdomen at his words. She wasn't sure what to say. "I like you," he confided on a yawn. Bree tried to stop a smile from creeping across her face. "You like me?" He nodded solemnly. Tugging his hand out of hers, he cupped her cheeks and leaned down to give her a kiss. And missed as he lost his balance, his lips trailing across her cheek before he fell into the sand. Bree snorted with laughter, grabbing her ribs as she was engulfed in helpless mirth. "That wasn't cool," came his annoyed mumble from the sand as he rolled over. "No, but it was memorable." Bree wiped a tear from her eye in amusement. She could not help another chuckle as she lent a hand to haul him to his feet once more. He pulled her against him, this time planting his feet better as his hands cupped her face again. Leaning forward, he kissed her. Bree leaned on him, enjoying the kiss. He certainly knew what he was doing, she reflected breathlessly. Warm, happy feelings bounced around inside of her. Her hands crept up along his life vest, and it was a long minute before he lifted his head with a satisfied smile. "Now that was memorable," he told her. Bree rolled her eyes. He was such a man. Ignoring the flutterings in her stomach, she grabbed his arm. "Into the water. The boat is waiting." Everett obediently followed her until they were thigh-deep in the surf. "It's cold." "No kidding," Bree said through chattering teeth. During a hot day, it would be refreshing. At night, not so much. She tugged on his arm. "We need to wade out." "What if the boat isn't there?" Everett seemed much more alert, reluctantly following her into the waves. "What if they didn't come?" "They are there. We hired them to be there. They are experts at search and rescue. They will find us," she assured him. Everett had paid a pretty price to make this whole island exploration happen. Soon they were swimming in the water, both of them keeping a hand on the other to make sure they didn't end up drifting away in the currents. Bree didn't admit that she was a little worried about the boat. She hadn't seen it yet. She assured herself it would be there. That was how she got through most of her life, with misplaced confidence that generally saw her through. What she really wanted to do was repeat her mantra of winning and finding her target. However, that would seem a little silly in front of Everett. Suddenly, a searchlight lit up the waters near them. Bree twisted to see it coming from a boat that was maybe 50 feet away. "Thank you," breathed Everett, relieved that rescue was coming at last. He began tugging Bree in that direction, swimming as best as he could in the waves. "Over here!" Bree waved her arms in the light. She hoped it was the boat that they had hired to rescue them from the island, and not Crawford's men. At this point, she was so cold she would be grateful to get out of the water. Minutes later, a swimmer in a wetsuit approached them.
Aubrey Henson and Everett Ramsley?
"That's us," Bree said with relief. She was shaking from the cold. The man flashed a light in their faces to verify their identities before he hooked a couple of lines onto their life vests.
"You'll feel a slight tug. Just concentrate on keeping your head above the water. Put your back toward the boat. It will be easier for you. We will reel both of you in with the cables."
"Great." Everett kept hold of Bree's arm anyways. He didn't want to get separated just in case anything went wrong. He noticed she continued to keep his shirt sleeve in a stranglehold.
"Thanks. This is what we're trained to do."
He gave them a big grin and spoke into a microphone.
"2 rescues secured. Bring us in."
He grabbed one of the lines, and they were all pulled toward the boat. Once there, 2 men helped to haul them up into an inflatable boat with a motor. The wetsuit man spoke into his mic again.
2 rescues on red boat."
"Copy," came the reply.
"Heading to home boat," the man said. "Copy that."
The motor revved to life, and they started flying through the waves. Everett put an arm around Bree as they huddled in the middle of the boat, shivering against the night air. Soon the motor was cut, and they drifted beside a much larger vessel. A ladder descended. The wetsuit guy went first, then Bree, then Everett. Up on deck, Everett and Bree were led to a cabin where sweats and towels were laid out.
"Shower's right there. Use as little water as possible," the man cautioned.
He pulled off the hood of his wetsuit, and they could see his friendly face.
"Hot coffee is coming. Afterwards the captain would like to see you. There'll be a man stationed outside the cabin. He'll lead you to the captain."
"Thank you." Everett held out a hand. The man gave him a handshake.
"No problem. It was a fun drill."
"Tomlin," a man poked his head into the room. "Captain wants to see you."
"I'm on it,"
Tomlin replied. He pointed to the man standing outside the door before he left.
"If you need anything else, ask that guy."
"Thank you." Bree's teeth were chattering. She looked forward to a hot shower and dry clothes.
"You go first,"
Everett insisted. Bree wasn't about to argue. She grabbed a couple of towels and the smaller set of clothing. It was a tiny space, but everything worked perfectly. It was amazing what money could do, she reflected. Without it, they would never have been able to get to the island, nor arrange for a clandestine pickup. Bree wondered how often it might have made her life a little easier in her job. Then again, it wasn't like she went after men like David Ramsley a lot. Mostly, she was a small-time, getting crooks off the city streets, not chasing men who would disappear at a moment's notice through connections and money. Bree slipped on the sweats, which were far too large for her. No one disappears, she reminded herself. Everyone leaves trails and traces. She just had to be good enough to find the traces and follow the trails. Flipping her hair out of her face, she wiped away the steam in the mirror. They had a lead. David was commissioning some guy to write his book. There was an intermediary between David and the ghostwriter. Once they found out who the intermediary was, they could find David. Bree would get her man. She cleaned up her wet clothes and towels, making way for Everett to use the small bathroom. Eyeing the shower, she wondered how well he was going to be able to tuck himself into the space. Shrugging, Bree decided there were times when being small was her advantage in this world. She used a comb to get rid of the tangles in her hair. As she brushed her hair, she relived the kiss that she and Everett had shared. Not the first almost kiss, but the real kiss. It had been very good. Truth was, it was probably the best kiss she ever had. There was something about Everett Ramsley. Bree sighed and put down the comb. He was just a guy who had hired her to do a job. So he thought she was attractive. A lot of guys did. And Bree used that fact whenever necessary to help her do her job. Perhaps that was a little wrong, but since she was small in stature, Bree needed to use whatever she could to her advantage. Giving herself one last look in the mirror, Bree went out to find Everett chatting with the guy who was standing in the hall. Bree looked longingly at the bed. She hadn't had much of a sleep, and she admitted she enjoyed a good sleep. "Shower's open."
"Good.
Everett amicably ended his chat with the guy. Grabbing the clothes and towels, he went to the washroom. Bree smiled and gently closed the door on the guy. It might only be a 15-minute nap, but she was going to take it. Bree was gently shaken awake. "Do you want to stay here or go see the captain with me?" asked Everett. Bree really wanted to stay. Instead, she pulled herself up from the warm blankets. "I'm coming." "Did you learn anything at the house?" questioned Everett as they followed the crewman along the small hallway. "David is writing a book," Bree said wryly. "I expect it's an autobiography of all his exploits over the years. That's why he's wanted to keep those files from his lawyer. It's data for the ghostwriter." "Ghostwriter?" frowned Everett. "If he puts all this information in a book, he's going to look extremely guilty." "I suspect it's him thumbing his nose at the world." Bree yawned. "He's telling everyone what he did, how he got away with it, and how no one will ever catch him because he is so smart. At least, that's what he thinks." "Wow, that takes some guts to do." Everett shook his head in amazement. "Not really. More like he's bragging," shrugged Bree. "He likes the attention. It must be killing him that he isn't currently calling the shots. That means he had to find control over something in his life and create a book glorifying his deeds as a balm to his ego." "You sound like you've met him," Everett said dryly. "That's exactly who he is." "I like to analyze the people I hunt. The more I know about them, the more likely I will be to catch them," Bree informed Everett. "It makes their behavior a little more predictable." "Then it's a bit of a science," mused Everett. "Predicting patterns and behaviors." "Absolutely," nodded Bree. She was glad he understood and was taking her seriously. Usually men of her acquaintance just thought it was cute that she thought she could take down the bad guys. They didn't have any confidence in her abilities. They approached the wheelhouse where the captain was having a cup of coffee. He had someone bring them each a cup after greeting them. "That was an interesting mission. Normally we don't get much of a chance to do an ocean rescue." "We appreciate your being available for picking us up." Everett happily sipped the coffee, glad to be warm and safe. "The good news is we have a way of getting you home. The bad news is we have been tasked with a new mission. That means things are going to change a little." The captain pulled out a map. "We'll be passing land here. Using the helicopter, we can drop you off near this town. If you call for a car service, you can get a ride at the nearest airport, which will be able to bring you wherever you need to go." "You've been tasked with a new mission?" frowned Bree. She thought they had hired the crew to be at their disposal for the day. "We're not only for hire, we also obey the call of the government when necessary," the man smiled. "In this case, that's what we're going to do. Obviously, I can't tell you anything more as a matter of national security." "We understand and we appreciate that you're willing to help us out," Everett assured the captain. He had been on a helicopter ride before. As long as they were not going to parachute him out of the door, Everett was fine with that. Bree studied the map. "It's not an international airport. This is going to put a little extra time on our agenda. Perhaps we could move things around a bit." "What do you mean?" asked Everett. "One of David's wives lives here," Bree pointed. "We might be able to get a direct flight to talk to her before going back to New York." "That sounds like a good idea," nodded Everett. "You two are really going to find him?" the captain asked, a little amused. "We will find him." Bree was confident in her response. "Then I wish you the best of luck," the captain replied. "You have about 3 hours before we need to deploy the helicopter. I would suggest sleeping in the cabin that you've been assigned. We'll notify you when it's time to come on deck." "Thank you again," nodded Everett. They followed the crewmen back to the room they had been in earlier. Everett pulled off the shoes he had been given and stretched out on the bed. "I am so tired. I can't believe someone set up a booby trap and tranquilized me." "I still can't believe you set off the tripwire when I warned you about it." Bree tossed off her shoes and took up her half of the bed, crawling under the covers. "Although, to be fair, the guards might have had tranquilizer guns and just shot you. Better that than a real bullet." "It was fun, though," he admitted, "besides the being drugged part." Bree had to smile. She loved the rush that the chase gave her.
Now tell me everything about what happened in that house and what I didn't see.
Everett turned to her. Leaning towards him, she filled him in on meeting the mysterious ghostwriter and taking pictures of the documents on the desk. A couple of hours later, someone pounded on the door. The familiar voice of Tomlin called out to them,
"Rise and shine! 10 minutes until you need to be on deck."
Everett groaned and rubbed his face. His arm was around Bree, and she was using him as a pillow. He shook her shoulder. "Wake up."
"No."
Bree snuggled closer. "Comfortable."
"Too bad. You'll miss the helicopter ride," he warned her. "I only hope they're not going to make us jump out of it."
Bree sighed and pulled away from him. "Chicken."
"Yep."
Everett readily agreed. He was in no hurry to repeat the experience. Rubbing the sleep from his eyes, he sat up and went in search of his clothes, pack, and shoes. Bree did the same. "Do you think they'll feed us breakfast before we go?" Bree wondered. "Coffee would be great."
"I think they're just going to dump us."
Everett stretched and yawned. There was a knock at the door.
5 minutes.
"Coming," Bree groused as she tied her shoes, then put her hair back in a bun. Everett pulled open the door, waiting for her. Tomlin was there in fatigues. He led the way to the deck, where a helicopter awaited them.
"Wait, it doesn't have any doors."
Everett frowned.
"Nope. She's stripped down so that she'll have just enough fuel for the return flight to the ship," shouted Tomlin over the rotating blades of the helicopter. "It's the bare necessities today."
Everett wondered how he was going to like flying over the water and land in a machine that had no doors. Somehow, it made the experience feel a lot less secure. Tamping down any nervousness, he grasped Bree's arm as they made their way to the helicopter. Tomlin helped Bree up, waited for Everett, then joined them. He showed them how to buckle up, then stowed their gear securely. Putting on helmets, they could hear the chatter through the radio.
"Going up!"
Tomlin grinned as the machine began to take off. If you enjoyed this chapter of In Pursuit of a Billionaire, Book 8 of the Ramsey Brothers series, look for Chapter 8. You can also check out my website to find promos, contests, deals, and more at josephinebeintema.com.